Hey everyone, in this second video of stylizing a scene from scratch, we're gonna deal with lighting the scene. So as you can remember, we prepared the scene for lighting and stylization last time. We have the scene here fully loaded with the 4 million polygons and everything there. However, we did not save it. It's very important to save the scene, and this has changed quite a bit from previous versions, simply because we were trying to fix how things were done within Maya. So let me explain what I mean by this. Nowadays, when we come here and we're saving the scene, I'm gonna change and put style 2. Whenever we're changing the scene, we're first going to be asked if there are references found if you want to save the stylization separately. And this is actually very important because, as you can see from the previous video, sometimes shader effects materials can get corrupted. And it also allows us to completely save the stylization ourselves without having to deal with how Maya saves the stylization, which can very easily explode in terms of file size in this case. So as you can see here, references were found, and we recommend separating the stylization while saving in a style file to reduce the Maya scene file size and to ensure reference edits are saved correctly. Should we automatically do this? 100% please do yes, because that way it's going to save the entire style, it's going to remove the entire style, then it's going to save the Maya file so that it doesn't explode in terms of scene size, and then once it's finally saved, it's going to re-import the entire style back in so that you can continue working as if nothing would have happened. So once a scene is saved, you can continue as normally because the entire style will have already been set again in the scene and your scene will be a lot lighter. Let me show you what I mean by that. In this case, the way I received the scene, it had very little stylization upon it, but as you can see here, we already had 84 megabytes for the scene. Now, instead of having the 84 megabytes, even though we have more MNPRX materials and everything already set up, we have reduced the file size to 12. And we have the style file, which contains stylization, which is only about 1.5 megabytes. So within 15 megabytes, we have the entire data that was previously saved in 84 megabytes. So this is already a big jump. And as soon as you start using paint effects over reference files, just because of how Maya saves these reference edits, the scenes are going to become dramatically smaller compared to how Maya would save this alone. So now that we have this here, we have the scene saved. I also want to change the workspace because we want to have as much viewport as possible within the screen. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna pop up the shelf using this shelf button here. As you can see, this is the MNPRX pop-up shelf, and this has all of the same tools that you have in a regular shelf. And I'm also going to hit Control Space to have the biggest viewport possible. And within this viewport, I can on demand enable the outliner or the script editor in case I need to troubleshoot things, or the attribute editor here in case I want to work with the MNPR config. So this window here, by the way, can be resized however you like best. I'm gonna keep it like this, and I'm just gonna put it up here that I use these the least, I would say. So yeah, now we have a very big viewport to work with, a lot of real estate basically on the screen in order to prepare this style. Before we do that, however, I'm gonna first tweak the global settings. So I go into the configuration node and I'm gonna make a few tweaks here. First, the color depth doesn't need to be 32 just for visualizing things on the viewport. I'm gonna put it to 16. In any way, whenever you're rendering in EXR, things are gonna be 32 bits, so that shouldn't be a problem there. And then this world scale for the entire project is of 100 here in this case. The atmosphere range is a bit too much. I do want to have some atmospheric depth here. So I'm gonna change these to 1000, for example. And then you start seeing that things on the back are starting already to have the atmosphere tint. I can go here to 500 and you can see this even more. You can go here to 300, even more, 100, then you start seeing up to 100 Maya units times the world scale, let's not forget about that, it becomes white. So it's like a change of color along the depth. We don't need 100. 100 is way too strong, but maybe 250. Yes, this can give a very nice sense of depth. And here, of course, you can change the color where you want this to go to, right? If you want this orange or blue, it's really up to you. For now, I'm going to keep it rather whitish, simply because the reference material is rather whitish. So you might remember from the previous tutorial series that I made Stylizing this year, over a year back, that our reference was quite yellowish. Now, since then, the project has evolved quite a bit, and the reference, the color reference that I have, is rather this image. So as you can see, it's more playing with whites than playing with yellows. So I'm gonna base this in terms of stylization, where things need to bleed, where things need to be highlight and so forth. But I'm gonna maintain myself within the style of this entire scene, within the lighting and of this scene as well. So let me move this down. I'm gonna make this a bit, just a tiny bit yellow in this case. So we have this now. I'm gonna make this from unit 10 so that we start right away. Maybe reduce this to 200 so that we really have something, yes, like this. So as you can see, this in the back, they're quite white, almost orangish, which we can put a tweak here. There we go. Now just see a hint of the buildings in the back. You can, of course, tweak this to the exact scene depth. So now that we have this set up, I'm gonna set up some ambient occlusion as well. So I'm gonna go here and set this to style specific. I like working with style specific because in the case of watercolor, for example, it doesn't just multiply ambient occlusion, it changes the color, it concentrates the color. So it's quite nice. As you can see here, if I go multiply and I'm gonna increase the strength, you just see how it just gets darker. Whereas if I have this as style specific, it also gets darker, but it also gets a bit more saturated in this case as well. Now, don't worry about these streaks that you can find here. For example, let me just show this, because once we render this out with TAA, they will be gone. Once we add here TAA, you're gonna see that we have very nice ambient occlusion. So let's configure this. This is a bit too strong in this case. You can modify, of course, the radius as well. In this case, I like this radius, just a little bit of ambient occlusion. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna keep it like that. Ambient occlusion is initially set up. Something that's also interesting once we add the lights for recreating this kind of look is bloom. So we're gonna go into that a bit later, this part here. And here I can configure more watercolor parameters. I'm gonna be tweaking this constantly over and over just to achieve the right look. But yeah, I mean, you can read all about these in the documentation. In case you're wondering what this is, you can open up here the MNPRX documentation, and this is already gonna open up the documentation and the configuration node, which is here. Here you can see what each attribute does in terms of changing the style. And in case you want to go watercolor, more specific to that, you can go here, and we have videos about what each slider basically does. So yeah, it's quite useful in that case, and we put a lot of effort in keeping this updated. So yeah, this is for these attributes, and then we have everything about the canvas, which for now I'm gonna leave as is. So now that we have the initial setup in here, just remember that once you switch to TAA, switch back to standard, because whenever you're tweaking materials, there's no way for the TAA to know that something has changed and that it should recalculate the TAA. So work in standard, render in TAA. That's the rule of thumb. So now that we have tweaked the global settings, we can go into lighting. Now, MNPRX is a real-time engine, meaning it doesn't necessarily support an unlimited amount of lights. It's not meant to be a ray tracer in this case. So we need to get by with as little lights as possible, achieve best possible results. So this is exactly what we're gonna do with this scene. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is here enable lighting on the viewport with this button. And there's also shadows enabled, and I'm going to disable the ambient occlusion from the Maya viewport because MNPRX simply doesn't use it. So all of these options here, MNPRX doesn't use it. You don't need to worry about them. We do our own thing. So now that we have lighting there, we see that everything is in shadow, right? So we need to add the first light in the scene. So to start with, I'm going to add a directional light. Now this directional light is over here. I'm going to make it bigger, make sure we are seeing lights. And I'm just going to tweak the light direction first. So from our reference, we have a light that comes from the front. Pretty much the characters are in backlight, but they're not a silhouette. So we need to take care of that. So once we go here, I'm going to modify how this looks like. Just gonna go a little bit into the shot cam perspective. So this is gonna be like that. For now, we can always tweak lighting later. Now, something that is of importance whenever you have these very big scenes is that the shadow mapping works well. And shadow mapping is a bit tricky to get right in the viewport. That's why there are many productions that just simply do a shadow pass with a ray trace renderer, and then they combine it with MNPRX results to have like a hybrid render, so to speak. For this project, however, we are using only viewport pretty much. We are doing very little in compositing. So the idea is to get the light and the shadows working quite well. So there's different ways to do this, and I'm going to link a video in the description below that explains how to maximize the viewport and using shadows in the viewport. So something that I have the advantage in this case is that there's not really any cast shadows in this shot, in this lighting. So we can do without shadow maps altogether in this case. So it really depends also on the shot and on the style. However, there is a little hack as well, because this is a hack actually that I played around recently. I was like, oh, this works quite well. So some of you might know after watching my video that the resolution of the shadow maps get distributed upon the area where either they're pointing at or from the origin, like in the case of the directional light. The directional light only distributes the resolution from the origin of the Maya scene outside, which is less than ideal, but it's just how Maya does things. So in order to circumvent that, we were previously doing a spotlight, right? A spotlight, we can define the area of effect, and then we can distribute the resolution of the shadow map along that area of effect. Now, we don't need that high resolution everywhere in the scene, right? And this is where the hack comes into place. And the hack involves having 3 different lights for the light in general. So you have a directional light that sets the original directional light, and then you have a negative spotlight and a positive spotlight. But yeah, I'm gonna do a quick tip of this hack in a future video, and I'm gonna link it down below as well. But basically doing this hack with positive and negative values, you can have shadow maps that are crisp, sharp whenever you need them, and still have a general light direction that lights the entire scene as well. So yes, for this scene, we don't need shadow maps. And going to just put this here. We are ready to light up the scene. I mean, to modify the materials to play in accordance with the light and to have more the result that we want here. So yeah, see you in the next video where we tweak all the lights in the scene to approach the look as best we can. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. If you liked this video, hit the like button and subscribe to be notified about future videos we do here at Artineering. If you want to support us, please consider becoming our patron. It really means a lot to have such an amazing community like you guys, and we're always there to grow together and take your feedback amazingly seriously. If you want to use this commercially, please consider buying our plugin. We have stellar support from yours truly and Adele, so we're here to help you and make your vision a reality. That's it. See you next time.